Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion focused on anti-transgender legislation as part of Citrix's Pride Month celebrations and activities. While we continue to hear some great news around the world on the tiny steps that are being taken towards building a more inclusive society for LGBTQ people, like the Spanish government, after initially voting it down on Tuesday, approved a draft of a bill that will allow anyone over the age of 14 to change their gender legally without medical diagnosis or hormone therapy. Or in Bangladesh, where the finance minister mentioned last week that firms hiring transgender staff could also get tax breaks. At the same time, however, what feels like taking a few steps back, we also hear news like in Hungary's parliament, which approved legislation banning broadcasters, advertisers, and media organizations from promoting homosexuality or transgender rights in any content that is accessible to children. Debates about transgender rights are raging across the world right now, but are especially intensifying across Europe and the United States. Germany recently voted down two bills that would allow people to determine their own gender. Today's discussion will be focused on similar discriminatory anti-transgender bills that have been introduced in the US legislative session with an intent to understand what's spearheading this change, that we can almost consider it as setting back the movement a bit. How is this relevant to what's happening on the global front? And can we expect to see similar trends unfolding across other countries as well? With that said, it gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Citrix Pride Alliance and the Outrikers Network to welcome our panelists for today, Stormy D. Forte and Angela Delara, who Kelly from our Raleigh chapter will introduce to you straight after this short video.
For Citrix to achieve our goal of becoming the preferred way to work for 1 billion people worldwide, we need to be inclusive in our own hiring, management, and cultural practices.
As a gay man, Citrix supports me by providing an enjoyable place for me to be my true, unique self. It's easy to share my identity with coworkers because Citrix has fostered a safe environment for all.
I have a passion for inclusion, and groups like the Citrix Pride Alliance enables individuals to be their authentic self and bring awareness to allies who want to support us.
I believe I'm a stronger leader when I'm able to lead out loud, which means leading by being genuine and transparent. It is important to have the Citrix Pride Alliance because
not everyone has the same level of comfort nor feel as accepted.
It allows every employee to bring their full, authentic selves to work and engage in a meaningful way.
The LGBT community here at Citrix is fueling our innovation and helping us reach new markets and new prospective employees to build an even stronger team to achieve our goals.
I am Heidi Sorenzia, based in California. I'm new to Citrix. I came over through the Reich acquisition, and I belong at Citrix.
I'm Scott Evich from the Citrix office in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I belong at Citrix.
I am Leanne Eblin, and I belong at Citrix.
I'm Tim Minahan, the executive sponsor and an ally for the Pride Alliance, and I belong at Citrix.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone again for attending today. My name is Kelly Evans, and I'm the co-lead of the Raleigh Pride Alliance. And we have two amazing speakers, as Melanie mentioned, lined up for you today. So the first, Stormy D. Forte, was appointed as the District D Council member on July 13th, 2020. She is a proud Raleigh native and a graduate of Broughton High School. Councilmember Forte attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, whoop, whoop, where she received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and a Master of Science degree in Rehabilitation, Counseling, and Psychology. She went on to receive her Juris Doctor degree from North Carolina Central and is a licensed attorney in the state of North Carolina and in the Eastern, Middle, and Western districts of the North Carolina Federal Court. Councilmember Forte believes in giving back to the community and enjoys volunteering in her spare time. She takes pride in serving all of District D and working with Raleigh's residents and businesses. She's also a proud member of the LGBTQ community. And so without further ado, Stormy Forte.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the invitation from Citrix to be here today to participate on your program for the LGBTQ family and your Pride Alliance. My name is Stormy Fort. I'm a member of the Raleigh City Council, and here to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that have been happening in North Carolina as it relates to LGBTQ litigation. I think a lot of folks are probably very familiar with North Carolina's HB2 bill that was enacted in legislation back in 2016, and that was the Public Facilities Privacy and Securities Act, which most people know as the infamous Charlotte bathroom bill. That bill was actually enacted on one day. A special session was called on March 23rd, 2016, and that legislation was passed by our General Assembly. And what that legislation actually did, it reversed a City of Charlotte ordinance that protected members of the LGBTQ family. Charlotte's ordinance, when it passed, allowed our folks who are transgender to use the bathroom based on the facility that they identified with in terms of their gender identity. HB2 was very sweeping when it was passed, and it wiped out all local ordinances that provided protection for LGBTQ members across the state of North Carolina. And transgender folks who had not taken some affirmative step either to change their gender on their birth certificate or to start the process for a surgical sex change were given no legal protections under the state law of North Carolina. And so that was one of the reasons why they said transgender folks could not use bathrooms in terms of the gender identity they affiliated with. And the major area of concern by the folks who enacted HB2 was what they call social engineering. And under that term, it basically meant that society was being prepped for and conditioning for men to dress as women and go into ladies' restrooms. Now, North Carolina is in the heart of the Bible Belt. And so you can imagine that folks, regardless of their political affiliation, at times can be incredibly conservative. And so you found that there was a lot of support for HB2, even amongst folks who are traditionally more left-leaning than right-leaning from a political perspective. In fact, I remember having a number of conversations with, folks at my church and other places who expressed concern that men were going into the women's restroom and would be in the same facility as women. And I had to be quite honest with them and tell them, without their knowledge, that probably had happened quite frequently, but they just did not realize that the person was a transgender, person who, dressed as a woman and appeared very much as a woman. So they had probably already had the experience and just didn't recognize it until it became a political hot potato. And so after that was enacted, the state of North Carolina experienced some very tremendous blowback. In July of 2016, the NBA, which had previously announced that they were holding the All-Star game in Charlotte, pulled that event from Charlotte and moved it to another location. And that particular move was estimated to cost the city of Charlotte approximately $100 million just on that one event in and of itself being moved out of the city. Other conferences, other entertainment events started being canceled in the state, and there were a number of very famous entertainers that had concerts or other events scheduled for the state of North Carolina that pulled those events just based on the inaction of HB2. In September of 2016, the NCAA had 7 championship series games scheduled for the state of North Carolina, and they pulled all of those. 48 hours later, the Atlantic Coast Conference, which, we're in the heart of, basketball country and sometimes football country in the state of North Carolina. And so the ACC also pulled its championship games from the state as well. In November of 2016, the governor at the time, Pat McCrory, who had been the former mayor of Charlotte, lost his reelection bid to now Governor Roy Cooper. And it's anticipated that, or a lot of analysts came to the conclusion that his, very strong support of HB2 cost him re-election. At that time, it was estimated that the state of North Carolina had lost approximately $3 billion worth of revenue just based on the number of conferences and other things that had been pulled from the state. And in fact, we had other local governments and state governments that were instructed not to, have any events in North Carolina based on the HB2 bill. And interestingly enough, in December of 2016, the city of Charlotte voted 10-0, their city council, to repeal the ordinance that started the entire HB2 situation. And surprisingly, Governor McCrory's response to that was to call a special session of the General Assembly to repeal HB2, which was an interesting political dynamic that Charlotte was trying to, eliminate the ordinance that started the entire situation. And then the governor's response to that was, let's get rid of HB2. And when that happened, the state Senate voted down the repeal, and then the state House did not take any action. Fast forward to 2017, the repeal of HB2 actually did occur in the General Assembly, and they implemented HB 142 in its place. And with that, under the new law, transgender folks could use the restroom or public facilities of the gender which they identified without having to take any affirmative steps or legal steps to change their gender identification. However, the new law still put a crackdown on local governments in terms of their ability to enact ordinances that would give protections to the LGBTQ family. And in December of 2020, that particular provision of HB 142 sunset. And so local governments had the ability at that point to start enacting ordinances that would give more protections to the LGBTQ family. So that's really where we are now. What you see at this point, we have a lot of municipalities that are working to establish ordinances or have already enacted ordinances to provide additional protection to the LGBTQ family. And some of the larger municipalities, including the city of Raleigh, of which I represent, we're still working to craft an ordinance that's going to give the most protection to our family and friends who are members of the LGBTQ community. But one of the things we recognize in Raleigh, as well as the city of Charlotte and some of the larger municipalities, we tend to attract the attention of the General Assembly when we enact laws. And so some of our smaller communities have already put something on their books, but we want to make sure that whatever we put in place in the city of Raleigh, and some of our colleagues in Charlotte have had the same conversations, that we want to make sure we put something on the books that's effective and that give ample protections to our community. But we're also trying to avoid a repeat of the HB2 situation in North Carolina. So with that, I will turn it back over to Kelly, and appreciate you giving me some time this morning, and I look forward to the question and answer session.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stormy. Appreciate that. So I'll go ahead and introduce our second speaker for today, and that is Angela Delara. She is the Vice President of External Communications at Freedom for All Americans, where she manages the organization's day-to-day communications, operations, and media presence. She has co-written co-ops for leading LGBTQ advocates in diverse outlets such as Reuters, CNN.com, USA Today, the Boston Globe, Philadelphia Inquirer, Miami Herald, Huffington Post, and more. She has hosted press conferences on key legislative votes, judicial hearings, and town hall on LGBTQ issues. As part of her role for nearly 2 years, she drove the media strategy for Freedom Massachusetts campaign, which in 2016 successfully updated the state's non-discrimination law to include explicit protections for transgender people in public places. Prior to her current position, she served as Deputy Communications Director at Freedom to Marry, the campaign that won marriage for same-sex couples. So it's my privilege to invite Angela Delara to the call.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, Citrix, for having me, and I hope everyone is having a wonderful Pride Month. My name is Delara. I do communications at Freedom for All Americans, which is a bipartisan campaign to secure LGBTQ non-discrimination protections nationwide. I am based in New York, and I go by any pronouns. So people are often surprised to hear that in 29 states, LGBTQ people are not explicitly protected from discrimination. This includes obviously North Carolina, but a majority of states across the country. We know that discrimination is pervasive and it happens every day, and it's a real problem that needs to be solved. And so at Freedom for All Americans, our mission is really to update federal law to include protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and to fix this gap to move closer to our nation's values of liberty and justice for all. And we really at FFAA prioritize working across the aisle with both Democrats and Republicans, with businesses, people of faith, people that we would call unexpected messengers that you might not normally think of when you think about support for LGBTQ rights. But we really believe that this is something everyone can get behind, and it is a value that everyone should support. And the good news is now, after about 50 years since Stonewall, when people, really began working on this issue in a coordinated way, we finally have an opportunity to update federal law and pass this kind of legislation. We know that studies show a bipartisan supermajority of Americans support non-discrimination protections. Again, a lot of people don't realize that this isn't already the law, and when they realize that it's not, it's something that has overwhelming support from people of all political affiliations and in all geographical regions. So right now we're working to try to pass the Equality Act in Congress. It has support in both chambers, and it passed in the House of Representatives with a bipartisan vote earlier this year. It also had a first ever hearing in the Senate in April, and it's now pending there. And Senate Majority Leader Schumer has said this is a priority for him. He intends to work with Republicans to find a way to get this legislation passed. So that's really exciting. We believe that no matter where you live, no matter what your zip code is, everyone should have the same equal protections. So this is a big priority for our organization. And we believe that despite how much polarization there is in our nation, this is something that all of us can get behind. It's about dignity and respect for everyone. We also know from studies and research that we've done that the most important thing to getting support for this type of legislation is meeting LGBTQ people one-on-one and getting to understand what being LGBTQ is all about, and knowing that we are members of people's families, we are your coworkers, your friends, your community members. And when people see LGBTQ people and when they know them one-on-one, that makes the biggest difference in terms of this support. So we try to have those honest conversations. At the same time, despite all the progress that we've made at the federal level, opponents of LGBTQ equality are persisting, particularly at the state level, and continuing to try to roll back the clock and pass anti-LGBTQ legislation. So this past legislative session, which is just wrapping up now, lawmakers in more than 35 states introduced awful anti-LGBTQ and particularly really egregious anti-transgender legislation. And about 120 anti-transgender bills were introduced that primarily sought to attack transgender youth and prohibit them from being able to participate on their school sports teams in K-12 grades in American public schools, and to ban transgender youth from accessing best practice medical care that's endorsed by America's leading medical associations and medical authorities. So really awful, and about 10 of these bills passed, more than any in previous years. And primarily they passed in southern states like Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, West Virginia, as well as other parts of the country like Montana and South Dakota. So the bills that passed were overwhelmingly bans on school sports for transgender kids, bans from allowing them to play just with their friends on a kickball team or a softball team or tennis. And, you know, these bills don't come out of nowhere. They are part of a very concerted, very specific effort by a small number of groups that are very vocal and very powerful. So we are working with our legal partners to challenge these bans in courts. The Department of Justice actually just recently signed on to our side in a challenge to the West Virginia sports ban. And we are really hopeful that these bans will be struck down as unconstitutional and that, you know, people will keep understanding that transgender youth in particular are our kids, and they, you know, aren't hurting anyone, and they just want to be kids. You know, growing up as a kid is hard enough. Going to school, we don't need to ban, you know, them from having the same opportunities as everyone else. The other development that I'll mention is just this month, the US Supreme Court ruled in a critical Supreme Court case on LGBTQ rights. The case is called Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, and it concerns whether a foster care agency that is religiously affiliated could turn away same-sex couples and prohibit them from serving as foster parents. So the ruling was very specific. The court did side with the agency in this case, but it has had multiple opportunities now between this and the Masterpiece Cake Shop case a few years ago to allow a broad license to discriminate against LGBTQ people, and it has not done so. It has said in its opinion that LGBTQ people are not second-class citizens, and we deserve the same opportunities as everyone else, that we're part of the fabric of American society and we should not be treated otherwise. So that is promising, especially with the very conservative Supreme Court that we have right now, that we got we could have had a much worse ruling. And the court did say that non-discrimination laws are valuable and should be enforced properly. This follows up on a ruling from the court last year in Bostock versus Clayton County, where they specifically said that sexual orientation discrimination and gender identity discrimination are types of sex discrimination and are thus prohibited by federal law. And we've seen the Biden administration take that ruling to heart and enforce it properly across federal agencies. Obviously, if you are a man married to a man and you're discriminated against, that is a form of gender discrimination, it's a form of sex discrimination. And so we're just really pleased that the court recognized that. So there are a lot of things to be hopeful for right now. And it's a reminder that we should just never give up on any type of person or assume that someone's not supportive of LGBTQ rights, and just keep doing the work of talking to people, showcasing who we are. And that's what we do at Freedom for All Americans. And I hope that everyone, you know, will get involved and know that there's work to do in North Carolina, there's work to do across the nation. And it has a global impact as well. I know that there are a lot of folks on today from a lot of different parts of the world. And prior to my current role, I did work at Freedom to Marry, the campaign to win marriage for same-sex couples nationwide. And I can tell you that the playbook that we worked on at Freedom to Marry, where we sort of figured out how to win people over and to talk about being members of families and to talk about love and commitment and what really makes a family and what marriage is truly about, was the way to win that. And so I have colleagues who are now working in other parts of the world, particularly in Latin America and in Asia, to try to win marriage and try to move forward on LGBTQ rights. So we know that folks are watching us here in America and that what we do will matter elsewhere as well. So I'll just stop there, and I hope that that's helpful, and happy to take any questions from everyone. And again, thank you, Citrix, for having me.
Thank you, Stormy and Angela. And we do have some questions coming in. Angela and Stormy, if you would come back on camera, so we can ask you both questions. Excellent, excellent. So the first question is probably for both of you, and it's what can we do? What can individuals do to help fight these bills?
I can start.
Angela, you go first.
So there are a lot of really incredible organizations working to fight against these bills. Obviously, Freedom for All Americans. There are a number of national organizations like ACLU, Human Rights Campaign, and of course in North Carolina, there are local groups like Equality North Carolina, the Campaign for Southern Equality. It is really amazing work. So it's pretty easy just to get involved and inform yourself. We always need people calling their senators, calling their legislators, and talking about what they support, because like I said, we do have a very vocal opposition. They don't represent the majority of Americans, but they're good at what they do and they're good at making themselves heard. So we have a lot of work to do to beat that back. So I would just say anything you can do to follow those groups. They make it really easy. You know, we have a tool to call your senators and leave them a message, and they listen to those messages a lot. So.
And I would echo Angela's sentiments. I was on a call last week with two of our congressional members to talk about a number of issues with the LGBTQ community. And, you know, one of the things I would say as an elected official, we always hear from folks, but we support the positions. And so it's, and as I said on that call, you know, last week, it would be important for our allies to reach out for folks who are probably more inclined to be on the opposite side of issues that we support, because contacting those of us who support you, sort of like preaching to the choir, like we're already there with you, but reaching out to the folks that you think are probably not likely to support would probably be a good way to go about it. And then what I say, you know, certainly companies like Citrix and others, when your leadership reaches out to elected officials, you know, folks from the business community carry a tremendous amount of weight in political circles. And so certainly having business leaders, be them small businesses or large corporations, but having leadership of those organizations reach out to elected officials is probably very helpful as well.
Awesome, thank you. And that actually tees up another question that was specifically for Citrix that I could answer. And the question was, has or will Citrix publicly oppose the anti-transgender legislation passed in Florida and North Carolina, especially since we have large groups of folks there? So I'll take that question because I work on this stuff every day. I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Lee Rubin from the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging team in Human Resources. And Citrix has signed on to a bunch of business coalitions. We've signed on to one with Freedom for All Americans. We've signed on to one with Human Rights Campaign. We've also signed on with Equality Florida. But being a global business and having folks all over the U.S., we've kind of made a corporate decision that our activism is going to be at the national level and at the global level rather than at the state level. So whereas we're happy to sign on to business leader councils in the states that we have large groups of employees, we have opted to work with large organizations like Freedom for All Americans and HRC in opposing legislation. And for folks that aren't aware, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, we have actually signed on to 11 amicus briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court. So when employment non-discrimination was going to the Supreme Court, Citrix signed on to, I think, 4 different amicus briefs. We have signed on to, as I mentioned, the business letters for employment non-discrimination. And we definitely understand how these transgender legislations affect our employees. And really the biggest effect is that most of these bills are targeted at children. And if you're the parent of a gender questioning or a transgender child, you are probably not going to stay in a state that has restricted, their freedom of enjoyment, or in many cases have criminalized their medical care. So that is a real problem for businesses, in that your employees may be forced to move to a more hospitable state, away from their office location, and definitely just the emotional toll that it takes on a family when legislation like this has passed. I don't know, Stormy or Angela, if you all have any kind of data about how these bills are affecting families in the areas where they're happening.
I don't have any.
Or Stormy.
Sorry, I was going to say I don't have any specific data, but one of the things I can say, looking at the history of North Carolina, when these types of bills are passed, it does have a significant economic impact on the state. I mean, we lost an estimated $3 billion behind the issue with HB2, and so I'd imagine that as you're losing those economic dollars, folks are going to be impacted, and they may choose to relocate to an area where you're not seeing such a significant economic and financial impact. So that would be one of I think the human costs. When jobs are not here, people go where the jobs are, so you end up losing folks and not having as diverse communities when people choose to relocate.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Excellent.
And I'll also just add to that, the majority of LGBTQ people who are raising families live in the South, where this legislation is more likely to pass or be introduced. And so, the risks are exacerbated for them. Of course, for people of color, people who are Black and LGBTQ, the challenges for them are disproportionately harmful. So it definitely has an impact. And, kids are seeing these types of bills passed in their states. We can, underestimate how harmful that is for them. So I don't have hard numbers off the top of my head, but certainly it has, an impact on families.
So this question is for both of you, and we're seeing these kinds of bills gaining momentum in the U.S. And they tend to be more focused on children than adults. So why do you believe this is happening?
I really that I don't want to speak for opponents of LGBTQ equality. I don't know why they choose to do this. But I do think that we often see backlash even as progress is made and as we're moving forward. There are these last-ditch attempts to try to scare people into rolling back rights and try to scare people into saying, if we allow this transgender kid to play in a sport, it's going to hurt your cisgender kid. And that's a lot of people who don't know about this issue are vulnerable to believing those lies. And our opposition is good at scaring the public into fear, right? Fear is a really strong emotion. That's what we saw with marriage as well. This idea that allowing gay people to marry is going to hurt you and it's going to hurt, the world. And it's just not true. And so we just have to do extra work to push back against that, unfortunately.
And I will say, I have spent my time in politics even before I was an elected official, and red meat issues are big business in politics. Let me just be completely honest. So if you've got a politician who's going out and throwing red meat to the base, that's going to generate a lot of money that is circulated in political circles through, campaign development, media advertisements, consultants, so forth and so on. So if you keep folks sort of ginned up about an issue, that definitely keeps an economic benefit to the folks who oppose certain issues. That keeps that going. So, I hate to be cynical, but certainly, that is a part of it, and that's a reality. Folks want to keep the money flowing, and so if you say things that are divisive, people are more likely to open up their wallets and pocketbooks and send you money.
Yeah. We've heard in the news recently that there's been some rulings around Title IX and protections that were already in place for women in sports and things, and how these may make some of these bills, especially the trans sports bills, not enforceable. Do you all know anything about kind of that rationale, and if that might help in this case?
I'm not as familiar with that as Angela probably is, so I'm not gonna keep on very long, but I definitely think people will throw anything out to see if it sticks and see what happens as it matriculates through the legal system and through the court system. So I think for a lot of folks, these laws are just basically put on the books to generate test cases to see what ultimately will happen in the legal system. But Angela probably has a little bit more information than that.
I'm not a lawyer, but we have really great lawyers in the movement who are studying this. And I know in West Virginia, for example, the challenge that they're bringing forward, we're very hopeful about that. I'll just say, as a woman, Title IX, which is supposed to ensure equal opportunity for girls, like the idea that the opposition is trying to use that to say transgender kids shouldn't play is just so hurtful and anti-feminist to me, and just I can't even tell you how upsetting it is to see that used as a tactic. So I agree. I think our opposition will just throw anything to the wall and see what sticks, but I'm hopeful. I don't know. I think we'll just have to see how it plays out in the courts.
Well, and one of the things I would say is yesterday, I mean, it's not related to this particular case, but yesterday the Supreme Court upheld a lower court decision for a transgender youth being able to use a bathroom in a school case. So now it wasn't a definitive ruling by the Supreme Court because they didn't hear the case, and certainly something could move forward later that they would actually hear it and issue a ruling. But in lots of ways, that was a positive sign to see that even with the current makeup of the Supreme Court, that the LGBTQ family did get some favorable treatment. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So this is a question for both of you, and it's kind of a personal question. What gets you the most frustrated in fighting these kinds of initiatives, and what keeps you going?
I think that I see a lot of burnout among my colleagues and among the movement more broadly. This is really hard work, and most of us are part of the community directly. And so seeing people say things about us that are lies, that are hurtful, that's hard. But I think at the same time, it keeps me going, the friendships that I've made and the really brave people that I've met in this work makes me really proud to do it. And, I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and I wouldn't want to change that. So I think just taking time for yourself and self-care is super important, and you just have to make time for that.
I think the thing that's sort of frustrating to me about watching all these laws come into effect is people's inability to mind their own business and feeling the need to regulate the behaviors of everybody else that does not look like them, or they don't think like them, and they think they've got some responsibility to manage the lives of everyday people. I think that's the thing that's probably the most frustrating to me, particularly when the opponents are quick to talk about freedoms and all kinds of freedoms until it gets into regulating, how somebody else lives their life. But what keeps me going is, being able to be a role model for other members of the LGBTQ family, as well as, other minorities. It's always it gives you a great feeling when you run into a young person who says, and being an inspiration to them, they want to get into politics, and they feel like now they don't have to necessarily have a certain look or be a certain type of person to be able to be successful in the political realm or the business realm. We certainly see that with Kamala Harris being our first vice president. So, just being able to provide, role models for folks who, especially like in our LGBTQ community, so many of our young people really struggle with their identity. And for some of them, the pressures can be so intense that they, look towards, things where they, harm themselves or try to, commit suicide and things along those lines. So if I'm able to be a role model and show them that you can be yourself and still be successful, then I enjoy that. And it's good to know that there are a number of LGBTQ elected officials and entertainers and other folks that can, be a role model for some of our younger people and give them encouragement and hope that they can be successful and be themselves.
So Stormy, a follow-up question to that. So you're the first, are you the first LGBT woman on the Raleigh Council, or the first LGBT person in general? And how did that affect your ability to run for council? Was it a benefit, or was it a liability? What can you talk a little bit to that?
Sure, I can. So I made history in two ways. I was the first African-American female to serve on the council.
Wow.
Up until my appointment, every minority member of the council has been a Black male. And then we also had two previous members of the LGBTQ family on the council, and we still have one. Jonathan Melton is also an openly gay male who serves on the council with me now. But I was the first open Black female LGBTQ person to serve on the council, and first open female LGBTQ member. And so, of course, the challenge is, I have probably got some different mail or emails and correspondence that my other counselor members don't necessarily get with folks who, have their opinions about my lifestyle and whether I should be serving and things like that. So I would say that, that at times that could be more of a challenge because, people don't necessarily judge me by the decisions I make. I mean, some people do that too, which is, that's more appropriate. But just, being able to have that thick skin to know I'm in this role for a purpose, and I'm trying to look, serve in such a way that we keep, the city of Raleigh, inclusive and diverse and things along those lines. So it was a challenge making history in some ways, but it's I think the benefits outweigh the negatives or the cons.
Awesome, thank you. So Angela, this question is for you. Having worked with Freedom to Marry and now with Freedom for All Americans on the Equality Act, what approaches or arguments or methods do you think have worked in the past to sway the opposition to our side?
Well, the thing that I love about both Freedom to Marry and Freedom for All Americans is that both are very singular, mission-oriented campaigns. So we can get very granular in what we're doing. We don't just work to keep ourselves going. We don't work on a multitude of different issues. So you really get to see what works and what sticks. I mean, it probably sounds really cliche, but really just showing personal stories of people who do face discrimination and what an LGBTQ family looks like and the ways that we all have more in common than we don't. And that way, showcasing veteran voices, showcasing older people, conservatives, all that kind of thing that people don't think about when they think about this issue is the most important thing. Yeah, I guess that's it.
So this question is for both of you, and we often hear that a large percentage of opponents to LGBTQ rights are people who identify as religious. as religious. But you know, how do we work with the religious community to you know, move forward in our rights, but also understand where they're coming from, because it does feel like it's a constant battle of you know, religious rights against equality. And you hear this not just for LGBT rights, but in many different underrepresented or marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, one thing I will say is that, you know, Angela listed a number of organizations nationally as well as locally that are involved in protecting LGBTQ rights. And what folks will probably find surprising is that you've got a number of religious organizations that are allies and partners in the movement. Now, certainly some of the more vocal opponents may affiliate with certain religious groups that don't necessarily participate or not necessarily considered allies. But to, you know, I would be quite honest, to my surprise, you'll find that a lot of folks who are in the religious community are supporters of you know, protecting our rights. For example, I'll name somebody from North Carolina. You know, Reverend William Barber is a very well known and very prominent you know, pastor and minister, but he's a very vocal ally of the movement and of protecting our rights. And you know, so I think it really just depends on the organization or maybe specific churches or denominations. But we do have a lot of allies from the religious community that that support us here in North Carolina as well as nationally. So that's always good to know, and it's good for us to remember that too. So we're not necessarily you know, putting people in a certain bucket when not everybody belongs in that same bucket.
That's right. I agree with that. I think it's a common misconception that there's this debate between freedom of religion and freedom from discrimination. We can do both. And I think freedom of religion matters to all of us. And there are a lot of LGBTQ people who are people of faith or who are involved in their churches or congregations. So I don't think we should dismiss that or think that it's one or the other. And I think trying to push back against that narrative, which the opposition often tries to push forward, is an important part of our work.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that was pretty much all the questions that we had. But I want to thank you both. I think this has been a great discussion, and you know, hearing from the local perspective in North Carolina and hearing from the U.S. national perspective from Freedom for All Americans has been really great. So I don't know if there's anything else that kind of came up while you were listening that you want to kind of say as like a last word. But if not, then any. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead, Angela.
Here. And if we can ever be a resource, or if there are any follow-up questions after this, please let me know. Happy to send over any information or any of those points that we discussed.
Excellent.
And I would just say thank you for the opportunity to participate. We definitely appreciate the great business partner that Citrix is in the city of Raleigh. You guys do so much outreach within the community, and we're very, very grateful for your participation and the things that you do working with local young people and also being you know, advocates and allies on local issues such as this. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, for the folks on the call, if you want to have access to more resources, we do have a resource library on the Citrix Learning Center. The easiest way to get there is to type Daring Dialogue into the search, and you'll see there are resources for LGBTQ equality. So please check those out. I also want to invite you all to join the Citrix Pride Alliance. Actually today, we're making a corporate-wide move from Slack to Teams. So go into Teams and look for under groups, ERG-Pride Alliance, and join the Pride Alliance. Other than that, happy Pride Month to everyone, and looking forward to being back in person in our Citrix offices in the next month and getting to see everyone again in person. So thank you so much, Stormy and Angela. It's been a great discussion today, and happy Pride Month, everyone.